Sanjeev and Guy from Reframing Race.
So Sanjeev, let's talk framing. So we're called Reframing Race, and have been for I think 5 years, but the initiative predates that, your brainchild. And I'm sure you won't mind me saying that I came up with the name Reframing Race.
Because
Um,
you're better at naming things.
well, the caveat to that is since then, sort of subsequently, every major pun and like cool title that we've had of a report has been your work. But I suppose my opening question is, why did you agree to this kind of Reframing Race name? What was it about that name that felt right to you to describe this project that was in existence beforehand? Like, why is it Reframing Race?
Yeah. So a few things like you had a long background in talking about racism. Some of this work comes out of or inspired by my PhD, which is really looking at how kind of race equity organizations in some ways have lost ground in the conversation on racism. So from I suppose a bit of a high watermark Macpherson report into the murder and subsequent investigation of Stephen Lawrence, talked about institutionalized racism in the Met Police, and that was language that was widespread, and there was an understanding. I think since then, in various ways, we've lost ground, and ideas of political correctness and more lately kind of wokeness, those have taken hold. So really I wanted to see how we could hold space and how we as advocates can get across crucial points. Racism is real, it's institutionalized, it matters, and we can do something about it. So the reframing piece was very much about how can we talk potently to those ideas? How can we land those ideas? And crucially, because our sector doesn't have much money, if you've got good ideas and people come to those ideas, that gives you power. And power means we don't have to ask for change, we can make it. So that was really why when you came up with Reframing Race, that really resonated with me. And there's a whole kind of sciencey bit, like those shampoo commercials on framing and why that's a helpful way of thinking about this work. Well, in which case, actually, do you want to talk about the socio-linguistics of framing and why framing kind of matters as a kind of technology for getting our voice heard?
Yeah, so what is a frame is probably the entry point to that. And you're right, they're these cognitive functions, like they actually happen. So I'm told by scientists, I'm not a scientist, but there's actually kind of something you can measure happening in your brain when you're accessing a frame. And they allow us all to process information quickly. We need them. And, it makes sense that we need them because if you think about all the information that we intake on a daily basis, everything from waving to somebody on the school run to something you see on the side of a bus to every single notification on your phone. If you were going to sort of neutrally analyze and like process every bit of information, to understand how it kind of was supposed to affect you and what bit was important to you and what it might mean. I mean, there's just no way that we could do that on a daily basis with all the information leveled at us. So our clever brains pick up shortcuts in whatever's being communicated, and these shortcuts lead to already established frames of understanding. And this allows us to instantly recognize what's being communicated. You don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about what it means on the side of the bus or what a notification on your phone that comes through means. You already know. The frames themselves are more or less instinctive, like they're activated in an instant, like way before conscious thought. And the shortcuts that trigger a particular frame, they can be words, images, gestures, metaphors or stories. They can be related to tradition or culture, things like slogans and jargon, contrast, spin, all of these sorts of things are or can be triggers to frames of understanding. And frames are, often shared, mostly shared among sort of groups of humans, like they, particularly those receiving similar information. And as such, they often play into tropes and stereotypes, which of course can be highly problematic. They are in some ways triggered by bad actors for exactly that reason. So framing's every day, and everybody will know what it is when they kind of see it. One easy way to recognize when something is being framed one way or the other is to think about opposites, that you can see. So, different ways of framing exactly the same thing or concept. So is it exploring for new energy, or is it digging for oil? Does a young footballer buy a new home for his family, or has he splashed out on a £2 million mansion? Are they regulations, or are they protections? Sometimes it's just a single word like that, and what frame that kind of evokes for you, for all of us. And two of my favorites relating to the work that we do, are you an immigrant or are you an expat? And is it foreign aid or is it paying reparations? So you can already see the politics at play and the different ways that a frame affects the way that we think about things, and that we see them all around us. They're obviously highly used in media, but we use them ourselves every day as well.
Yeah, and there's that George Lakoff stuff, isn't there, that really kind of and he talks a lot about these ideas of how ideas are represented in the world. And you know, we have talked in the past, you especially, Bell Hooks talks about kind of language as a place of struggle. Toni Morrison, I think in her Nobel laureate speech, talks about how language and words breathe life into the idea of the racialized other. And I think we also have the idea that if we could reframe that, we can also breathe life into our shared humanity, into the right of dignified life for everyone, equal humanity, and so on. So this is powerful stuff, and what is said and what isn't said matters. Just going back to your point of the visuals, I don't know if you remember, like in 2015, Nigel Farage unveiled this poster, and was behind him, and it was Breaking Point. So this was in the run up to I guess, the Brexit referendum, and it's kind of like the brown zombie horde, kind of, that kind of threat, and that's triggering all kinds of fears and anxieties. And and I think in some ways doing the negative framing is easier than the work that we're doing, but that makes our work, I suppose, all the more important.
It is, and it's important to say that, frames are kind of established and then quite fixed in our collective understanding. So you have to think about whether you're entering a frame, albeit you're trying to negate what's being said, you might be trying to say the opposite. But if you're entering a frame that kind of is set up for you to fail, and there's another fabulous Brexit example of that, of course, the 350 million on the side of the bus, which, was debunked as nonsense very quickly. But the framing of that, which was that we are paying the European Union a lot of money and we should instead use that money for something else, like it's wasteful, was the kind of framing. And it was a lot of money. And by kind of reiterating really that fact in a different way, by trying to say this is not true, but nonetheless repeating the frame, even if you're saying this is a bunch of lies and actually it's not that much money and I can calculate it and show it to you, like those on the Remain side did. Instead, they were just re-entrenching completely the framing of we are giving a lot of money. Maybe it's not 350 million pounds, but we're giving a lot of money to the European Union. And of course, as we know, Brexit happened and the Leave vote won. And George Lakoff, who you mentioned, his book, he's the kind of godfather of framing, really, who came up with this idea of a frame, this sort of cognitive linguist. And his sort of seminal textbook on it is called Don't Think of an Elephant, which is precisely trying to show you that thing. You myth busting and coming in with the facts can be dangerous in the game of framing, because if somebody wants you to think of an elephant, you cannot enter that frame and say, don't think of an elephant, and win that argument and be persuasive. So yeah, just something for us to think about when we're reframing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and obviously we've got lots of guidance about how we might reframe better, because we'll talk about it in a future kind of episode. And contain strong language is the report on the website if people want to delve into this a bit more.
And you had an important point as well, maybe to finish on, about what we're trying to do in terms of reframing, and this idea that it's not about a sleight of word, I think was the phrase that you used. So what is it that we're
Yeah,
trying to do?
yeah. I think so. When people have a whole set of ways of looking at the world, often we found in our research people think about race and racism in quite complicated and contradictory ways. Um, we're This isn't about mis-selling anti-racism. We're not simply trying to get people to agree, um, and then just kind of hope they forget about it. For me, the work isn't about, yeah, that sleight of word so that you can get everyone to agree. Because when you can get everyone to agree on things, often the things that they're agreeing on are somewhat empty and meaningful. So we did a message test, didn't we, which was about combining ideas of race, working class life, and anti-poverty work. Lots of people in our message test agreed, but then when we looked at whether it moved them along in terms of anti-racist feeling and sentiment, it didn't particularly, because that just kind of washed over them. So I think when we're trying to present or represent anti-racist ideas out there in the public square, I think we fall back on bold, decisive action, life affirming action, a different kind of future being possible. So that's our ambition. So it's not just a bit of fine tuning. We're talking much more about transformation, and that's the kind of reframing that we try to do. Um, I think one of the things that we say as well is that when you talk in those terms, you're not just describing the future, you are kind of in a way remaking it. You're breathing life into those ideas. So I think when we think reframing race, it's not about kind of selling. It's not about getting people to simply agree. It's really getting people to invest in an idea of the future that is rather different from the one, the present day. And I think if you're going to do reframing, do it big.
Good. Let's end there. So thank you for listening and watching. And if you found this content useful, follow us on LinkedIn or sign up to our newsletter by visiting reframingrace.org.